Hi, my name is Larry Jordan, and welcome to this Power Up webinar on still frames and speed changes inside Final Cut Pro 7. Speed changes changed, and the way that we export files changed within the new version of Final Cut 7, and I want to show you what those features are so you can put them to work in your own projects. So let's get ourselves started. The goals for this session are to illustrate the 4 ways that we can change the speed of a clip in Final Cut Pro 7. We can create freeze frames, which I will often call still frames. We can create fit-to-fill edits, constant speed changes, and variable speed changes. We'll cover these techniques, plus I'll also show you how to export a freeze frame and resize it for the web or print. We're going to start with freeze frames or still frames. I'll show you how to create a freeze frame, how to export a freeze frame, and how to pick the right codec, whether it should be a JPEG or a PNG or a TIFF, how to deinterlace and resize a freeze frame using Photoshop. In fact, one of the things that's interesting is that between Final Cut 6 and Final Cut 7, some still frames don't have to be resized, and some still frames do. And let's get ourselves started by illustrating how to create a freeze frame. For instance, here's a clip where we've got our mad snowboarder flying through space, and we want to create an impressive freeze frame of him about to be swallowed by the sun. All right, how do we do it? Well, you can create freeze frames inside the viewer, the canvas, or the timeline. You simply put the playhead where you want the freeze frame to be, go up to the Modify menu, and say Make Freeze Frame. The keyboard shortcut is Shift-N. As soon as you create the freeze frame, it shows up here inside the viewer, and you can control the duration of that freeze frame by going to Final Cut Pro, User Preferences, the second tab, which is called Editing, and notice that we've got a still freeze duration, which defaults to 5 seconds. With that freeze frame here, there's 3 different things we can do with it. If we want to use the freeze frame in the future, simply grab the freeze frame and drag it into the browser and let go. The freeze frame now lives as its own element inside the browser. Now, the neat thing about freeze frames inside Final Cut is that you're not actually creating media. What you're doing is you are providing a link to the master file so that Final Cut will create media as it needs it during the rendering process. But you can create as many freeze frames as you want, and your hard disk is not going to get any bigger because all we're doing is simply pointing to the source file on your hard disk. Second way we can deal with the freeze frame, we see this in sports a lot. I'm going to change the duration of this to, say, 3 seconds and 15 frames, just an arbitrary time. Could be anything you want. Notice that I have not moved the position of the playhead in the viewer, and I have not moved the position of the playhead inside the timeline. I'll do an insert edit by clicking the yellow envelope, and watch what happens. We have our mad fool jumping, freezing in space. I add a title key that says he's 700 feet in the air, and then it picks back up again with the action. The benefit to this kind of effect is it allows you to interrupt the action, to add a text key or a voiceover or point out particular style elements. And then when you're done with that particular emphasis on that moment in time, the action picks right back up where you left it. I use this a lot in sports and information training is the word I'm looking for, where I want to break something and say, look at where this person's standing, or look at how this is pouring, or whatever else I want to talk about. A freeze frame allows us to draw attention to detail that we may not see as part of the video itself. Another way to deal with a freeze frame is at the end. For instance, here I'll type Shift-Z so I can scale my entire sequence to fit inside the timeline and position myself on this marker that I left for myself to say this is the shot that I want to freeze. To create a freeze frame, Shift-N, and the freeze frame is automatically created inside the viewer. Now, at this point, I'm going to edit it down, and because I have not moved the playhead in the timeline, when I edit it down, it picks up right at the point where I created the freeze frame. We see this technique a lot in soap operas, where we're doing a slow push into the girl's face. And she says with trembling lip while looking at the man in the picture, in the room, she says, and John, I'm pregnant. Music goes boom, boom, boom. Cut to John's face. We freeze John's face, and fade to black. Go to commercial. This is a traditional way of emphasizing the shock, the surprise, the happiness, the gladness, the terror, whatever the emotion of the week happens to be, on John's face, and then we fade to black and go to a commercial. So there's 3 different ways we can deal with freeze frames. We create them all the same way. You put your playhead on the image you want to freeze and type Shift-N or modify Make Freeze Frame. Then if you want to break the action and resume it, do an insert edit. If you want to break the action and go to a break like a fade to black, then do an overwrite edit. And if you want to preserve the freeze frame for later use, then grab it from the viewer, drag it to the browser, and you can reuse it whenever you want.